afloat. It is such an honor to welcome to PNP Live Adrian Tomine, celebrating his book, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Cartoonist. Adrian was born in 1974 in Sacramento, California. He began self-publishing his comic book series Optic Nerve when he was 16, and in 1994 he received an offer to publish from Drawn and Quarterly. His comics have been anthologized in publications such as McSweeney's Best American Comics and the Best American Nonrequired Reading. His graphic novel Shortcomings was a New York Times notable book, and his other graphic novels include Killing and Dying, Scenes from an Impending Marriage, Summer Blonde, among others. And since 1999, Adrian has been a regular contributor to The New Yorker. Adrian will be in conversation with Jason Zinoman, the author of Shock Value, Letterman, and Searching for Dave Chappelle. And he is a comedy critic for the New York Times. So I want to thank you both. Thank you all for being here. Please join to PNP Live, Adrian Tomine and Jason Zinoman. Welcome, fellas.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome, thank you. Thank you so much. And it's a real thrill to be doing this at Politics and Prose.
I know, we purposely paired you guys up. I thought it would be nostalgic for you to have some connection back to DC in this
It
time.
meant a lot to me, Politics and Prose. DC, it's a huge anchor in for anyone growing up in DC. Friends like worked there as a kid, and
Yeah.
no, it definitely, and it's weird to be doing this dystopian book event.
Yes.
I mean, it's a little weird because this book has a lot of book event like things and interviews and promotional and Comic-Con.
I know, it's so strange.
We're doing one of them now.
I know. This could have been like a whole epilogue to the book of like, okay, you don't want to go on tour, then now, sit in a bathroom and talk to a screen instead. How's that?
Yeah. What do you think about this genre of book event relative to all the other kinds, this sort of virtual kind? I
was dreading it. I thought this is going to be horrible. That's just my expectation about everything. But, in this case, I was pleasantly surprised that I am a lot more comfortable apparently talking either one-on-one or in this situation rather than I get so caught up in the audience and trying to get through to them or, I did a talk recently with Wyatt Cenac, and so he had a lot of experience with this too, but we were talking about how like you can get completely fixated on the one person in the audience who seems to be kind of like shaking their head or something. And he got even more specific and was talking about body language. He said, if he sees someone like cross their arms, he's thinking like, do you not know the basics of body language to know what a message that's sending to me right now? And then he tries, harder to get through to that person. And so for me, I'm like freed up by that. I sort of can't help but sometimes try and look at the numbers of participants or the comments that come up or something, but it's still easier on me than actually.
There's like a difference between a comic and a cartoonist, because a comic is in like the most sensitive to an audience response of any artist.
Yeah.
They measure whether something, I mean, there's exceptions, but they measure whether or not something is good or bad according to laughter.
Yeah.
In a way that trusts audience response, in a way that I actually think is a little unhealthy at times.
Right.
Because laughter is not such a pure reflection of quality as a lot of comedians think.
Right. I'm sure you've seen it where there's uncomfortable laughter because something is going wrong or is weird or something, but the comedian still registers it as laughter nonetheless, right?
Yes, or there's like cheap laughter. I mean, you and I both have small kids, and if, we mention farts,
right,
we'll get a laugh, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that's a good joke.
Right, yeah.
Right? It doesn't mean and there's the equivalent of that for comedians. I mean, I'm curious as like in your job, how much you think about audience when you're coming up with, even on like a page to page level.
Yeah.
Like, are you thinking about audience?
I used to, a lot more so than now. And it got a little paralyzing. There was a pretty long stretch of my career where I became like overly obsessed with how things were going to be received. I was imagining a particular audience and how they'd be responding to work in relation to previous work. Yeah, it was very challenging, but I sort of, in recent years, have tried to almost like trick myself out of that mindset and almost work on the premise that maybe what I'm working on won't ever see print and maybe won't have an audience. So let me just try and do it for my own enjoyment and make it as good as possible for myself. And that was crucial to this book, especially because there was so much that normally I would maybe feel uncomfortable revealing to a large public. And so I had to sort of, like with this one, I didn't pitch it to my publisher, and I didn't take an advance before I started doing any work and get on that treadmill of like worrying about the deadline. I worked on the book till I was about halfway done with it before I told anyone about it. And that really was helpful for me to just shut out the thoughts of an audience, of a publisher, of anything, and just kind of revert to my childhood version of making comics in isolation for my own amusement, really.
Yeah, what was the kind of original animating idea of this book?
Well, the original idea was just the stuff that's in the first part of the book. Like I've said this before, but because I've always been drawing comics, and that's how people know me, like relatives and friends, they know me as that always throughout my life, even when I was a kid, when something actually bad, like not just kind of mildly amusing, but something truly bad would happen to me, inevitably someone in a well-meaning way would say, oh, well, it's all good material for you, right? And of course I'd be like trembling with rage and like, but I'd have to say, yeah, that's true. And I think, even though it maybe annoyed me for a while, it sort of planted the seed of the idea of taking some of these negative experiences and sort of transforming them into something comedic. And then the book really came together when I went through the experiences that are detailed in the latter part of the book, where I go to the ER, and that sort of gave me a way to make it a complete book rather just like a series of sketches.
Well, let's talk about the physical book, which I love.
Yeah.
And it really makes you realize how boringly similar most books are. Like there's such a specificity in terms of the texture and the ribbon. Even the bio is done in this very unusual way. Why did you make these? Are all very conscious choices that are not the common choices for making a book.
Right.
Why did you do all these? And what I have to imagine that there was challenging just from a production point of view.
Yeah, it was expensive and challenging. It just in normal times, it would have been challenging and expensive, but we also went into production on it just as the virus was really starting to rear its head in a significant way. So, we initially started production on it in China, and that plant shut down. And so we had to pick we had a few options of other places in the world that were capable of doing this kind of production. And in my infinite wisdom, I picked the place in Italy, thinking that would be a safe place to move the book to. And, and then at the very end, there was a component, the part of the binding that they needed to get from China. So they had to wait for that to reopen. And so, and if we had just printed it as a regular book, we could have done it domestically for, probably much cheaper and had it done much earlier. But it was something that I, unfortunately insisted on, or I felt strongly about. And I'm thankful that my publisher, went along with it. But to me, it was kind of two things. One was, I feel like there's a lot of people like me who present themselves as bibliophiles, and they talk about supporting bookstores and encouraging people to read the real books and everything like that. But I think there's also a little bit of it's somewhat incumbent upon us to give people a reason to do that, to say, this is why the book, the physical version is different and offers, in my mind, like this book actually, the content is so intertwined with the format of it that I think that that's the whole thing is part of the experience of understanding the book. And if you read to the end, you'll sort of pick up on that even more. So I felt like this obligation, same with the last book with Killing and Dying. It was complicated and expensive to do a transparent plastic dust jacket with white opaque printing on it. But that's just my little obligation that I feel to sort of make books something that you want to pick up and will catch your eye if you're browsing in a store.
But why this particular, like why, for instance, one thing that sticks out to me is like, let's take the sticker.
Yeah.
The stickers. Stickers is something that, like, it's me that I touch it, like I think about childhood.
Yeah.
Stickers is this thing that kids love.
Yeah.
Teenagers, like you'll see stickers on amps and guitars.
Yeah.
It's like unquestionably fun stuff.
Right.
Kids play with stickers. Then there reaches a point in your adult life.
You don't get to enjoy stickers.
You're not allowed. No adult can be an adult, like a and play with stickers. You're not allowed. And then you realize that once you, like, you know, anytime you're confronted with them, you're like, there's so much fun stickers.
this was my my long game of how to justify playing with stickers as an adult.
Stickers back. You're doing it. You're doing it, Adrian. Why was it important to have a sticker on the front and the back?
Because I wanted the printed book to, as much as possible, replicate my actual sketchbooks that I have at home, that I do the rough version of this kind of work in. And I often do that. I'll go and get those kind of name tag stickers with like the red border, and I'll put that on the front and I'll write the dates that the sketchbook covers, or I'll put a title on it or something like that. And if you read the book, you'll see why it makes sense for it to look like a sketchbook. But I also had this insecurity where I knew I was going to do that. This new book was going to be done in a different style than I'd done previously, that it's not as lush and it's not as precise and it's not in full color. Like my last book, I think people would connect it with my New Yorker covers in some way. And this is quite different. And I think I'm just self-conscious enough that I wanted to sort of send a preemptive message to readers. Like, I didn't have like a complete decline in my abilities or something like that, but it's all intentional. And I thought if I packaged it like a sketchbook, that would immediately sort of explain the drawing style.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little about the image on the cover, on the sticker.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, just yesterday, my 6-year-old came up to me. I was looking at the book, and she looked at this sticker, and she was like, "Oh, that's funny."
Really?
I said to her, "No, you're wrong. You're terribly, terribly wrong. It's
not funny.
You're a fool and a nincompoop," because that's how I talk to my kids.
Right.
And so who's right? Who's right, Adrian?
I'm gonna side with I guess it was Alice, right? I will side with her because I'm guessing that, like a lot of kids, she intuitively picked up on my suffering, which is probably amusing to her.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yep. So
comedy is a man in trouble.
Yeah. That's the basic. It's boiled down in that image. I think the little sweat beads were crucial to it.
Well, that was it. So those little squiggly lines.
Yeah.
Which there's a scene in the book in which you're talking to your daughter's classroom, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And which you're trying to explain to them what you do.
Yeah.
And how you do it. And you point to these little loops, these little beads, mm-hmm. which actually do a tremendous amount of work in this book. Mm-hmm. And one kid says, "Oh, they're like sweaty." Mm-hmm. And you agree with them.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, how literal is that? Like, are we supposed to evoke what sweatiness is like? Or is there a part of it which is like, there is an element of sweat that you want us to think about? Or is it just anxiety or what?
I mean, there are times where it's definitely accurate, especially since having moved to New York from the beautiful weather of Berkeley, California. But I think of it almost like a punctuation mark in a manuscript. Huh. Like when you read a sentence that has a question mark on it, it's subconscious. You don't stare at that squiggly shape with the dot and think, oh, I must now process that sentence as a question. It's like a subliminal thing that affects how you process the work. And fortunately, it seems there are a few of those symbols that are kind of embedded universally in the subconscious of readers, not just in America, but all over the world. And so I think that there are a lot of people who will come across an image like that and they won't even consciously process that as, was it humid there? Why was sweat flying off his brow or something like that? But they'll get that I'm stressed or concerned or something like that.
Yeah, is that like is that something that you saw and people use that loop forever?
Yeah,
like
there's
hardwired into us.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things like that in this book that in my previous work I felt like I was trying to be a little too serious. Like I'm trying to do graphic novels, not comics, and so I would try and strip away a lot of those elements, like the sweat beads or even a thought bubble where you can sort of have a squiggly line around words that tells you that the person's thinking that rather than saying it. And I kind of stripped that all out of my early work because I was dying so much to be respectable and not like those childish comics. And as I've gotten older and more secure and more confident about what it is that I really do for a living, I've been bringing those things back. And I've found that it was like, you know, being a musician who chose like to not use a vibrato or something like that. It's just like, it's a tool that you should use as much as possible, I think.
Well, that's really interesting. I guess one other question about a choice in this image, because once I sort of noticed that and was looking at what, how you made the mouth and the posture and all these things, the line at the middle of this right here goes down.
Yeah.
On one level, right, that is just like this line over here.
Yeah.
It's the wall.
Right.
But it also is right above your head. And to me, it added like some other tension.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how purposeful that is. Like, why did you make that? You didn't have to put that line there.
Right.
Why did you do it? Was that
absolutely?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're the first person who's asked me about something like that. And when and you're right that it's intentional. It's not random, and it's when I'm drawing every little image in the comic, I'm sort of trying to move it along at a quick pace. I was trying to draw this book faster than normal, so I didn't want to overthink everything. But still, at every minute when you're putting the pen down on paper, you're making a million little choices like that. Like I could have easily omitted those lines, or because I mean, those are like cabinets right next to my desk, so those are really there, but no one knows that. So I could have easily omitted them, or I could have placed them somewhere else. But it's in the moment as I'm putting the ink to paper, I make these little decisions almost unconsciously. And so I don't think I said, if I put this line here, it'll create a compositional thing that will create tension or something like that. But something in my mind, brought me to make that line. And then, obviously I had many chances to go back and delete it if I want to. But
right,
that's the cartooning is often thought of as such a staid and calculated process. But I think there are elements of it that still do connect to performance or improvisation or live work in some way, where you can't spend a lifetime thinking about every single detail in every panel, because really it's an art form that needs economy. You need to get the message out in an economic and clear way. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of that, of just kind of in the moment, I'm almost kind of holding my breath sometimes, like, is that okay? It looks okay, good enough. And then I move on. And then, it's more like in hindsight, like when you pointed out, I think there was something in my mind that, drove me to do that.
I mean, do you think when you look back at your work, do you think that your best choices are like that come from sort of some subconscious place where you're not planning out, or are the best ones the result of a lot of consideration and plotting?
No, I do. Most of my comics, there's a complete version of the book that people have seen, but it's rougher, like almost not somewhere between stick figures and the final thing. And it's just done in pencil. And 9 times out of 10, to me, that rough version has more energy, has more liveliness, more expressiveness. But I think that's only to me because I know how to decode those scribbles. And I don't think they would register quite as well to a new reader because they would look so sloppy. So I have to translate it into the version that people see printed. But the challenge is to try and capture some of that subconscious stuff that you are alluding to that comes through when you're just, you know, doodling almost. And
right.
yeah.
So, let's, in the kind of opening scene, you're a kid in a class and you're talking about, you say this sort of sets the table for the whole story.
Yeah.
That when you grew up, you wanted to be a famous cartoonist, right? And presumably this is true.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. What did your parents think about that?
That's a good question. I should ask them that. I would love to know that. I would love to know at what point they made a mental shift from, or if they have yet, between like, this is our kid's weird hobby and let's be encouraging and let's support him, to like, oh, I think he might have a shot at this and, you know, maybe he's going to pull it off or something. I don't know. I was always encouraged, you know. I don't think they stressed the fame or the success part as much as I did, but they were encouraging of me doing the artwork and creating that work. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you can put yourself, as I'm doing now, in the shoes of my parents and think how strange and challenging it would be to have a kid who's so determined and so single-minded from such an early age, and it's in a field that maybe you're not that familiar with, and so you don't know how to quite judge your kid's objective ability. And, you know, I don't know. I think I'd have a hard time being a parent to me. You know?
If your kid said, I want to be a famous cartoonist.
Yeah, or it would have to be something that actually I am more unfamiliar with, you know,
Right.
like it would have to be like, I want to be a famous mime or something like that. And I'm like, really?
Well, one thing that your book does, right, is it gives you this portrait of, you know, this is sort of under the surface a bit, but how this field of cartooning has changed over the years. Because your career spans a big amount of time in the field. Has the idea for kids that young, the idea of a famous cartoonist, evolved? Do you think? I mean, you're not a kid anymore, but what's your sense of it?
Definitely. I am pretty sure that when I was a kid, that I was in a very small minority of people who even thought that there were humans who created comics. You know, it's just like you open up the newspaper and for some reason Heathcliff is there. Like the newspaper made a new Heathcliff strip or something like that. You never think that there's a guy sitting at a desk drawing that stuff. Right. And I mean, that's part of why I show myself getting ridiculed in classes, because I was so obsessed with not just the work itself, but like these artists that no one had in the class knew of. But, you know, I think now, at least, I have a biased sample to draw from, but based on my kids and their friends, they totally know, like they know who Raina Telgemeier is, you know?
Right.
And to them, she is like a celebrity more so than a lot of musicians or actors.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, you know, to me, she's like the real example of the fulfillment of the fantasy that I had when I was a little kid of being a famous cartoonist.
Yeah, I guess there was no version of her back then. Or
I don't think so. I mean, there was not so much that format. You know, there were comic strips in the newspaper, and then there would be books where they collected a year of those comic strips. But the idea of someone doing a full length, you know, what we now call a graphic novel for young readers, I think is sort of a new thing, at least within our lifetime.
You show yourself as a kid saying, I want to be a famous cartoonist. And then you show what is, you know, a less than glamorous portrait of the life of a cartoonist. What do you imagine your young self would think of this book?
That's a good question. I think my young self would be horribly disappointed by the material. Like he would be completely bored with it and wonder where are the superheroes and the science fiction elements and all those things that he loves so much. I think he, you know, the young version of me did not know that this type of work could exist, that he had yet to have his eyes peeled open and to learn that comics could be used to tell more normal human stories. On the other hand, the young version of me was so ambitious and so single-minded that he would see this and be like, yes, I pulled it off. I just want to quickly, I saw someone popping up in the chat to sort of refute something that I said and listing great cartoonists like Linda Berry and Nicole Hollander. And of course, they were doing great books and long form books, but I think that came along later, not during the time that I was talking about when I was a little kid, like in 1974, you know, right. and certainly these innovators have come along since then, and we definitely owe a debt to them.
By the way, in about like 5 minutes or 10, I'm going to start asking questions from audience members. So if you want to put, there's already a few I see.
Yeah. We got to keep the tradition alive of DC being the most combative and, you know, in my memory, every time I've done an event in DC, it's the one where I felt most kind of on my heels and like.
Is that true?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
What's the most like crackpot aggressive question from DC that comes at you?
Is your wife white or Asian?
I know the answer to that question.
Yes, you do.
No spoilers. I have a your wife question later on.
All right, let's keep it alive.
I'm going to get to it. Sarah, keep people. I hope she's listening. All right, no, but I want to get to something that you just mentioned because it's a big theme of this book, which I think about a lot. Where you say in the book, at towards the end, you say, or your character says, if being so you wonder if being so single-mindedly focused is a good way to spend a life.
Yeah.
Right? You're someone who knew what he wanted to do, very young, dedicated your whole life to it, and then by the end of the book, you're saying you're questioning whether the single-minded focus is a good way to spend a life. I think it's worth lingering on this for a sec. First of all, why not? Why not?
Because I might have also been a great athlete had I, or something like that. You know,
no, you wouldn't have.
No, not that example, but I might have done something different. I might have done something more useful to the world. I don't know. I just feel like at age 2, I put on blinders to all other opportunities and just said, I must pursue this one path. And I would feel really apprehensive if one of my kids did that now, even though they're older than that. If they just said, I found it. I'm sure I have all the wisdom I need right now to make a decision for the rest of my life, and I'm sticking with it. You know, I would be concerned. And not only just in terms of careers that I've missed out on, that I had a level of focus and obsession with reading comics, talking about comics, and making comics that was really to the exclusion of a lot of things in life, and to the detriment of human relations.
Okay, but I'm going to stick up for your old self.
Okay, good.
I have a series of questions here. If you weren't as single-minded, would you have been as successful?
No.
Would you be as good as an artist?
No, because I don't think that I was born with any natural ability for this. I don't, if you look at like the early childhood drawings of mine, you would say like, it just, yeah, whatever. It looks like all the other drawings that you see pinned up on the wall at school. It's okay, you know? And I think the road from there to here is just a million hours of practice or whatever, however many hours it is. And I think that I could have picked some other thing. I could have picked like pasta making or something, and I would now be a pretty good pasta maker because I've spent so many hours practicing and going through a trial and error process.
But I guess it gets to the question of like obsession, and isn't there, I would say some people would say, isn't there joy to be had in obsession? Isn't there happiness to be had in obsession?
I mean, contrary to the impression that the book might give, it's one of the happiest zones of consciousness that I could be in when I have, I mean, it sounds like such a luxury now, but if I could have 4 hours uninterrupted of sitting at a drawing board working on a comic that I'm pleased with, like that is one of those, I mean, you might have this when you're really in a groove with a writing assignment where you feel time, it's like some sort of like time lapse where you lose track, where suddenly 4 hours have gone by and you felt like, how did that happen so fast?
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, when you're going about the drudgery of daily life, you're very aware of each minute passing by.
Yeah.
And so that when I think that happens rarely for me, but when it does, it's sort of like the experience of like a meditation or something like that, where you're conscious, but you've sort of, I don't want to sound too Berkeley about this, you know, but you do have that sort of, yeah, I can't get away. But it is sort of a amazing experience when you're so in tune with this creative endeavor that you lose track of time.
Yeah, I mean, but couldn't it be that your sense of the drawbacks of being single-mindedly focused on something is because that was the route you took, that the alternative is worse, you know,
Yeah.
being mediocre and not having access to this obsession?
Yeah, well, and now that we're talking about it, the other thing that always comes to mind is it wasn't really a choice. It wasn't like,
Right.
you know, the football team and the cheerleaders were saying like, hey, come to this party with us. And I said, no, I gotta lock myself in my parents' house and draw comics. You know, like I think it was more of a defense mechanism. Like, God, I have nothing. It's Friday night. I've got tonight, all day Saturday and all day Sunday with nothing to do. Let me give myself some big imagined project that I can feel like it's like a fake deadline on me. So I feel really busy and like not left out.
Right. Let me just a few more things, and we'll get. There's actually a bunch of questions here. Talk a second about a lovely subject of loneliness, which is something that people are thinking about a lot.
Right.
In the pandemic, where people are isolated. I mean, I think in that way, the book is actually, you wouldn't think about it, but it is timely. And it's in your title, and you talk about being lonely. Mm-hmm. And your portrait of being a cartoonist makes it seem lonely. At the same time, you're sort of in a funny way, you know, you say like, I want to be alone, right?
Yeah.
Be alone, I'm lonely. It's these contradictory things. Do you think that it's inherent in the job? Is loneliness inherent in the job, or is it more of a reflection of your makeup?
I think it's both. I think I have the horrible kind of personality that will feel dissatisfied with whatever my circumstances are to some degree. So like there's 2 panels in the book where I'm in the middle of doing a book signing and there's all these people standing around and I think I just want to be alone. And then cut to, you know, later that night where I'm sitting in my hotel room by myself and I'm feeling like, I just wish I was around people. And that's sort of representative of going out on a book tour, but it's also just my everyday life. Like, you know, not even in relation to quarantine, but that feeling of like, I wish these kids were somewhere else. And then suddenly like, oh, I sure miss those kids. When are they coming home? Or, you know, and I just think that, I don't know if that's true of all cartoonists. But, you know, so like when I made this book, I think it was sort of talking about how, I don't know, like it was, I'm almost jealous of the position I was in before the quarantine when I made this book, where I could be so cavalier about like, oh, going on tour kind of sucks. Like you have to fly on a plane and go visit friends and stay in a hotel and eat in restaurants. Like what a hardship. And now I'm just like, you know, thinking that would be, I wouldn't want to do, you know, 3 months of that, but you know, a week of that would be
right.
Much appreciated.
When you're talking to your daughter's class in the book,
yeah,
you define cartooning at one point. And this is dividing for kids, but it struck me because you say it's using simple drawings to send an idea from my mind to yours, and it made me wonder if does thinking about it that way make the job seem less lonely?
Well, Yeah, I think I was early on in my life, I was prepared for the possibility that cartooning would always be a hobby of mine, that I would have some regular job and that I would just draw these things for my own enjoyment. And that does seem kind of lonely, the idea of doing this work that is, it's not like a fine art form. It was never meant to be hung in a gallery or for collectors. It was originally intended to be in newspapers and to entertain the masses. It was really like a mass form of education, entertainment. And I think that, the idea of doing the work now, there is a part of me that takes a lot of comfort in the experience of getting the work out into the world and hearing feedback and doing things like this, which is interesting because I have to sort of, like I said, I have to block out the thoughts of that when I'm creating the work. But I think it's a little bit of a obvious ruse because I'm still going through with the process with the knowledge that eventually I'll get to this point and get to enjoy the response from the world, which is.
So one more question, and I'll open it up to some of these questions. But so you do also, I don't know, about halfway, 2/3 of the way through, you meet your wife, and you present this sort of courtship, first date, and you present it, understandably from your
Yes.
Anxiety-ridden, point of view, like
Right.
complex interior life point of view, your insecurities, all this. Now, full disclosure, I'm old friends with your wife. I went to college with her for a long time. She has her own bustling internal life, full of her own anxieties. Do you run this by her before? And even if not, I'm just curious what her response is to your portrait of your courtship.
She has told me she's been tempted to come barging in through the store and and sort of fact check me a little bit and give her side of the story. She was, and she's right that I present her as sort of a foil, like she's sort of a cartoon simplification that reacts to whatever I'm going through, which might sometimes feel like her actual life, but is not really representative of who she is, of course. But so she was saying that just last night, she was saying, because everybody keeps talking about the anecdote in the book where she and I are sitting at the sushi restaurant in Brooklyn and the couple sits down next to us and begins just like criticizing my work, not knowing that I'm sitting there. And she thinks that I missed the point in the way I told that story because I focus it all on the guy who's talking, and I wrote his dialogue in a way that was really intelligent and kind of insightful in its criticism. And she thinks, in her recollection, that the guy was really not that smart. His criticisms were not that good, that he was a lot more offensive in a blowhardy kind of way. And at the same time, she was angry at the woman at the table for buckling so easily and just sort of like accepting this guy's torrent of criticism about something that she actually started the conversation liking, and she sort of like changed her opinion based on this tirade. So she sees a lot more nuance in things. She's a lot more psychologically minded. I still haven't pushed the limits where she actually has asked me to change anything or said like that's really inaccurate. Like, she read all this before it went to press, so she could have said anything. It's just, now after it's out there and people are saying, how funny it is or something, she wants to put her spin on it.
There's a point about that guy.
What's that?
About her take on that guy being not as more of a blowhard than you portray him to be. Do you think do you think she has a point?
Oh, it's not that she has a point. She's correct. Like it's absolutely correct.
Is that because you're trying to put some of your own self-criticism in his voice?
A little bit. It's me trying to do this essentially kind of narcissistic dance of showing how brave I am to present criticism of me, but also arrogantly trying to short circuit it because I'm putting it out there to reflect positively on me.
Right.
It's totally complicated, but for all that weird knot of reasons, it worked more. It made more sense to make that guy quite intelligent, and I was able to sort of cull from many different sources of criticisms and my own self-criticism, and sort of funnel it into his own words. And a lot of that.
This is a great transition to the questions, because our first question is from a friend of ours.
Oh, really? Oh my gosh.
More specifically, his kids, Gal Beckerman.
Hi, Gal.
His wonderful kids, Mika and Romy, who are smart kids, whose question I was gonna ask this question, Mika and Romy, but I'll let you have it. This is the same question. How do your kids, talked about how your wife, how do your kids feel about becoming characters in your book?
Okay, first of all, if you guys are watching it, hi Mika, hi Romy. Hope to see you again in real life sometime soon. How do my kids feel about becoming characters? Oh, they feel great about it. When my younger daughter was in school earlier this year, they had a day where they talked about careers, and everybody was talking about what their parents do for a living. And I just couldn't resist. I had to ask May, like, okay, what did you say? You know, and she said, well, I told everyone that mommy is a psychologist or a doctor or something like that. And she said, and I told everyone that you draw pictures of yourself. You know, so that was she sees it as totally about, I mean, you know, I've had this whole other career before her lifetime, but she only knows this book. So she thinks that, you know, my job is drawing them and me and Sarah as characters, and she gets a kick out of it. And Nora definitely gets a kick out of it. You know, I don't have a private studio or anything. So what I'm working on is fully on display to my family. And I definitely noticed that my older daughter's interest in what I was working on started to turn up as I was approaching the chronology where she knew she was going to become a character in the book. And then suddenly she'd come home from school and like rush right over and see where we were in the story. And then once she showed up in the book, she was a very close reader and editor. She would fact check me about things, and she definitely calls me out when she can tell that I've made a little distortion or a little change in reality. And, you know, I think she thinks like, what a liar he is. But so far, I think I've been careful enough that I hopefully haven't done anything that they will object to or feel too embarrassed about.
Okay, let's look at another question here. We have from Michael Avalio. I hope I pronounced that right. Are you going to do another long-form graphic novel next, or will your next book be another set of short stories?
Oh, that's a tough question. I'd have a better answer about that if I hadn't been living in quarantine for the last 5 months, dealing with homeschool and cooking and all that stuff. I had an older cartoonist once give me a great bit of advice, which was to never go out on a book tour until you know what you're going to work on the minute you get home. Because it can be really terrifying when you're just caught up in the promotion of a book and you're riding high on praise and everything. And then you get home and you realize I'm starting at zero. I've got nothing. I got it, you know. So normally I would already have that all sorted out, but I haven't had a minute to really even think about it. And so I've been working on little short-term projects and things outside of comics. But I, at this point, have no idea what my next comic-related project will be.
Here's a question from Jim Dugan. Do you feel like your goals or ambitions have changed over your career, or are they still broadly the same? Like to just make the comics you want to do and hope they want to find an audience? If you have your ambitions, which is, I think, you know, in this book to some degree worth looking at, but have they changed?
They started to a little bit, and I steered them back to where I was originally, because I've found that there's other areas of my life, other endeavors like illustration for magazines and screenwriting, which I'm attempting to do, where there's all these external forces and I'm trying to please a lot of different people, and I have to take in other things into consideration, like financial things and all these things. And it really made me appreciate that comics is still the one avenue for me that I can kind of do whatever I want. And I've just really wanted to embrace that. I've wanted to try and hold on to that as much as possible, rather than go down a path of using my comics for something that's like the equivalent of making a Hollywood movie, where you're sending in, submissions and getting notes from editors and test marketing it and all that kind of stuff. One of the greatest gifts that I've had career-wise is that I have this publisher that for 25 years or whatever now has allowed me to do that. And to this day, I have just an amazing kind of perfect working relationship where when I need help, when I need assistance or input, they're ready with it and they give it in a perfect way. And when I need independence and need to be left alone, they trust me to work in that way. So
this is drawn in quarterly.
That's drawn quarterly in Montreal. And
because it is incredible. Like, I mean, I don't know much about cartooning publishing or graphic novels, but in other kind of publishing, that's a very unusual it's not unprecedented, but it's unusual for that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Is it unusual in this world or no?
I don't know. I think it's getting increasingly unusual. Like I think I'm still reaping the rewards of being old enough to having started in the sort of Wild West days of alternative comics, where, my publisher originally was just a guy working out of his kitchen in an apartment in Montreal. And we were like friends more than anything else. And so I think, fortunately, as the market has evolved and things have gotten more fraught with peril in terms of money and marketing and all that stuff, I've sort of been able to at least clear the bare minimum of the hurdles required that my publisher can still say, okay, you can still, until you really screw up, you can keep working in the way that you always have. And that's really, I think that's like the biggest like creative gift that I've had in my career. It's the thing that's really kept me going. I think I would have burned out if making comics was the same as, making a Hollywood movie or something.
So I think you answered this question from Diana. Dennis Nishi, he says, you mentioned in another discussion that editors will sometimes have you send work right to the printer. Are you actually laying out the book and doing your own copy edit as well?
Yeah, so there have been times where like he asked, I did everything. I scanned the artwork in, did the layout, designed the cover, all of that. And then my publisher basically just forwarded those digital files onto the printer. And I remember there was one time when my publisher at the time, he's since, I guess he's sort of retired, but he said to me, I look forward to reading the comic when it comes back from the printer. And I'll give you my feedback then. Because I was sort of waiting, I'd sent him the files, but he was like in such a rush to just get it to the printer. He said like, I'll give you my feedback when I read the printed thing. And so, yeah, it's the luxury of having an editor that trusts me that way. And also just having been able to learn from people over the years, just the bare minimum of technology know-how, so that I know how to produce one of my books, basically, or at least, I mean, they've gotten a little more complicated now, but I know how to do enough stuff that in the old days used to be more like sent out to a pre-press that would handle all this kind of production work.
So we have a question from a New York celebrity here.
Do we?
From Emmy-winning host of Theater Talk, Susan Haskins.
All right, yes.
Woman who's been around the theater a long time, so her question is pertinent. She said, would you like to make a theatrical version of your work like Fun Home, which is was a massive success and catapulted that work and that artist, her work being on Broadway to another level of public consciousness?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I have to, this is a little embarrassing, especially since now I know that I'm in the presence of, theatrical royalty and Jason has such a long history with theater, but I did not grow up with theater. I am from the West Coast. It was not a part of my upbringing the way that it is for most New Yorkers. And when I moved out to New York and my New York born and bred wife decided she needed to start giving me a little bit of culture, and she would take me to plays kind of for the first time in my life. I wouldn't tell her this, but I kept having this experience of like the lights would come up and I'd be like, that's it? That's what that famous play is about? It's really just two guys sitting in a room talking? I've heard this title for so many years and that's it? And everybody's clapping, you know? And I didn't want to let,
yes, yeah.
I didn't want to let her know that. I'd be like, yes, you know, amazing. But there was a part of me that thought, why do I get so much shit about the endings of my stories about being inconclusive and being too minimal? This is a great Broadway play, and it just ended on a totally ambiguous kind of cliffhanger note, and it's well respected. So I was sort of humbled and sort of embarrassed and also inspired. I really felt like, oh my God, you know, I felt encouraged in the way that I'd been writing by theater in a lot of ways. It was something that I didn't know about, but when I saw it, and especially when I saw the reactions from people, I thought like, okay, there's some, you know, there's some validity because it's something that was criticized about my work for so long. And yeah, and you know, we've seen plays together. I really credit you with that process to me in a way too, of just getting me into these shows that I wouldn't know about, that I wouldn't necessarily go to otherwise, and really kind of having my eyes open to it and just feeling a kinship with an art form. It's funny to kind of become familiarized with an art form so late in life and say, oh God, there's these parallels here that I never knew about before.
So if Scott Rudin called you up and said, how about, Adrian, you go in business with me?
Yeah.
We turn the loneliness of the long distance cartoonist. I get Hugh Jackman to play you.
A musical. Yeah. Finally, something my kids would be proud of. They would be so
make a killing.
They'd be so thrilled. Yeah.
We have another mutual friend here, wonderful Julia Rydehome.
Oh yeah.
Asking a question.
Hi, Julia.
This is another good question that I wondered. Do you actually sketch on gridded graph paper, which you'll see in this book?
Yeah, I often do. For some reason, I mean, for obvious reasons, it works for sketching out comics because you can use the grids as guides to do the square panels. But beyond that, I've always just sort of had some attraction to it, just for handwriting and for sketching. So for me, it was kind of like this nice little indulgence to print that graph on this book's paper, because it replicates a lot of the sketchbooks that I have in my house. But Jason, I also noticed that there is a quote from a name from my past. It's someone that I went to high school with.
Oh wow!
And it's at the top. It's my old friend Karen Ochida, who I haven't talked to in a long time. So I'm happy to see her name here.
He says, have your kids gotten sucked into book series like Captain Underpants and Dogman, or do you plan to ban those from your home? I'm sorry, Karen, you were at the top, so I missed you. Have your kids gotten sucked into book series like Captain Underpants and Dogman?
Not those two, but even if they did, I would not ban them from my home. I am always happy to get my kids reading anything, even if it's something, I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot of graphic novels that my kids have read that are not exactly to my taste. You know, I have to, at bedtime, kind of hold my tongue about, well, the panel transition here wasn't exactly up to snuff or something. But anything that's going to get my kids excited about going to a bookstore or wanting to read a book. And for selfish reasons, it makes me happy that they enjoy comics of any quality. And so, no, I wouldn't ban those. I actually, I'm not that familiar with Dogman, so I don't know if it's something objectionable or
convenient, Adrian, to not be that familiar with not wanting to answer the tough questions. I think there's two more here. I do not know the graphic novel genre that well, other than your work, so this might be an ignorant question. Is there anyone in your field writing to an audience of parents? I found the scenes related to parenting so relatable and funny.
Wait, are you? I think you're seeing questions that I'm not seeing.
That's this next one.
doesn't matter, but.
I don't know. It's an anonymous attendee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't have it. Can you reiterate it to me?
Yeah, so it's basically saying they like how you portray parenting, and wondering, are there other people in the field writing for an audience, I guess, of parents?
Oh, okay. That's an interesting question. I think there's a lot, and I'm sure I'm gonna overlook a lot of them right now just because I'm under pressure. But let's see, for sure, Chris Ware from Oak Park is a great example of this. He, especially with his book, Building Stories, there was a lot of really incredible parent-child relationship elements. And even in his most recent book, Rusty Brown, there's a lot of stuff about those generations. Oh, I see people on the chat bringing up Lucy Nisley, who also has done a lot of work, autobiographical work about being a parent.
Let me ask this, we only got a minute left. Let me get to the this question by a woman named Sheila. There seems to be an extra blank page in the book at the end. Is it there for the reader to doodle or draw or write notes?
Yeah, it can be used for all those things, I guess. I wish I had a more inspiring answer, like to say, like, it's for you to write your own ending to the story or something. But the truth is just that books generally need to be printed in what they call signatures of 8. So it's a number that is divisible by 8 because it's the paper that's folded that way. And I do not plan ahead, and I don't, I used to, when I was making comic books that had to be 32 pages, that was like the primary thing that was imposing how the story would be told because it had to fit within those pages. One of the joys about moving over to just creating books or graphic novels is, like with this one, I didn't have to think at all about that limitation. And I just did as many pages as I needed to. And so where it ended was not quite divisible by 8 or something like that. So there's a few extra pages. And you'll see that in a lot of prose books too. Okay,
well, I think we've hit the end of our time. I really appreciate you this time and this conversation, Adrian, and thank you. Well,
thank you for doing it. Jason, do you know a Joy Zinoman?
Never heard of her.
Okay, there's a comment there that jumped out at me.
Where is that? I don't see the Joy. Okay, that's a good. We'll leave that be. Yeah. Bye, Mom. Bye, Mom. Love you.
Aw, so sweet. Thanks for everyone for watching this. And Jason, it was great to hang out with you. I'll see you back in Brooklyn soon, I hope.
Definitely. Great to see you too. Thank you, Politics and Prose.
Yeah, and everybody, thank you for continuing to support Politics and Prose. It's a great bookstore that's meant a lot to me over the years, and I'm glad that they're still going strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Jason. That was fantastic. I did drop that link in the chat a few times, so please do click on that. Support Adrian and support Politics and Prose. The Loneliness of Being the Long Distance Cartoonist is available right there. There you go.
And Letterman by Jason Zinoman. There it is.
Absolutely, Letterman. There we go.
One of the best books ever written about a public figure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here with us. Thank you again, Adrian and Jason.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, stay safe. Stay well read.